Good afternoon and welcome everyone to a Eurogas Let's Meet event. We're very happy to have you all with us here today. And indeed, we have a number of experts who will be able to take us through this very important topic, where we are indeed looking at how we are going to decarbonize buildings in Europe, one of the main contributors to greenhouse gases currently in the European Union. And we'll be looking and talking about the technologies that we need to reach our climate targets and how difficult and how challenging or how easily this could be done. Indeed, we want to look at the technologies that can contribute to the decarbonizations of buildings, as well as what kind of activities we could see that could support buildings deliver our climate targets. I'm very lucky today. I have a good number of experts with us. We are happy to have a video message from MEP Seán Kelly, who of course is a shadow rapporteur on the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive in the European Parliament. This will be followed by Stefan Moser, who's the head of unit for buildings and products from DG Energy in the European Commission. And he will indeed give us a very good overview of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and of course the impact of REPowerEU and the war, the Russian war in Ukraine, how that has impacted what we need to do with buildings legislation. And that will be followed with a good discussion with Hélène Sibileau from the Building Performance Institute of Europe, and indeed Federica Sabbati, the Secretary General of the European heating industry, who will be looking indeed at buildings and heating technologies and seeing what kind of pathways we can examine for making sure that buildings do contribute, as they're supposed to the overall decarbonisation of Europe. For my part, I would like to say welcome to you all. Of course, the audience is the most important part of all of this. I'm very happy to have you with us today. So please don't forget, you are very much able to ask questions to our audience, to our speakers, sorry. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, there'll be an opportunity for you to write a question. This question will then be picked up by myself, and I'll be happy to put it forward to one of the panelists, whoever you're asking the question to. And indeed, we do expect and hope for your interaction here, because we do like to hear the voice of the participants. And so I think without further ado, I would ask my colleague Kathleen if she would be very happy to begin with the video from Seán Kelly that we've received, touching on his work on the European Performance Buildings Directive and what is going on in the European Parliament. Thank you, Kathleen. If you could run that, that would be great.
Unfortunately, I cannot make it to today's very interesting event. However, I would sincerely like to thank Eurogas for the invitation and for the opportunity to say a few words on how we can decarbonize buildings in Europe and what technologies should be deployed in doing so. Over the last year, I have led negotiations on behalf of the EPP group, which is of course the Parliament's largest and most influential group, on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, or EPBD for short. The EPBD is the main EU legal instrument in this area, but the Fit for 55 package is interconnected, and the likes of the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, amongst other pieces of legislation, will have a major impact on the decarbonisation of the sector. From a climate perspective, the need to address the built environment is clear. Without tackling this area, we will not achieve climate neutrality by 2050 as defined by law. The proposed directive will not only contribute to the Union's climate goals, but will also support the Union's efforts to ensure energy security. Even after the crisis is over, gas prices will for the foreseeable future stay significantly higher than before 2022. This new baseline is projected to hit people in the worst performing buildings 10 times harder than people in an efficient building. Renovations will make households and companies more resilient to energy price surges by lowering energy consumption of buildings, and will, in the medium to long term, help reduce price sensitivity to volatility in fossil fuel prices. The EPBD brings more certainty to the pace and timeline of the Union's sustainable transition in a manner that can be taken into account by credit institutions and financial institutions in their decisions on portfolio allocations and medium-term financing. The EPBD would bring positive value to the building value chain and job creation. For example, 18,000 long-term jobs will be created for 1 billion invested in energy efficiency. I believe that the real enforcement mechanism will be the market itself. We have spoken to many banks and credit institutions who are all keenly aware and supportive of the EPBD as they're preparing to add more green financing mechanisms to their portfolios. The train has left the station in this regard, and I believe the EPBD is as much about assets and investment protection as it is about climate change. Low EPC rated buildings would be less valuable regardless of the EPBD. The question of today's timely event orientates around how we can actually renovate at scale. For my part, in negotiations on the EPBD, I have tried to introduce as much flexibility for member states as possible in achieving the necessary results. Buildings do not move across borders, and it makes complete sense to take into consideration local and national circumstances and the diversity of our building to ensure a cost-effective approach. This, of course, includes utilisation of existing infrastructures and energy sources. In EPBD negotiations, I ensured the inclusion of all technologies that are ready to run on renewables, that they can play a role in decarbonising buildings. The role of gas in buildings is expected to largely decrease with a higher uptake of insulation and electrification. However, gas-based heating will still have an active role. Switching from a direct gas use to heat pumps or district heating will likely still require gas use upstream. Renewable energy is defined in the red, which includes gaseous solutions, and it's clear we should ensure that these solutions are available for decarbonisation where they make sense. For example, replacing natural gas with biomethane for decarbonisation of buildings with hybrid heat pumps. The renovation wave is a major challenge. We should not hide from this. There will be big barriers, such as access to finance, grid capacity, uptake of heat pumps, availability of installers, etc. Therefore, we must ensure we decarbonise the building sector in a practical and effective manner. However, progressive decarbonisation is the ultimate goal, and we must be unwavering in this endeavour. Thank you very much.
And indeed, we thank Seán Kelly very much for his very useful and interesting remarks to open this event today. And indeed, we are, of course, focusing very much on the Energy Performance of Building Directive. He has mentioned other related files. And I'm very happy that we have Stefan Moser with us, as I mentioned at the beginning. Indeed, the head of unit responsible for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Good afternoon, Stefan. Welcome to the event. We're very happy to have you with us here today. You've just heard Seán Kelly, of course, outlining a very comprehensive overview of many things, but one of the points that he made towards the very end was the point about the needing to be pragmatic and the availability of different types of solutions, if you will, to decarbonising buildings. How do you feel the Energy Performance Building Directive is relating to that? Does it do that? Is it pragmatic? And I think for our viewers, it'd also be very interesting for you to also give maybe the context of how EPBD came out a little bit before the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion, and therefore, what is the impact of REPowerEU on the way you also think about the EPBD in the European Commission? Thank you, Stefan. The floor is yours, and please 5 to 10 minutes introductory remark, and then maybe if there are any questions coming from the audience, we'll offer them to you. And if not, I probably have one or two of my own up my sleeve. So thank you, Stefan, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, James. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be with you, and also I'm very grateful for Mr. Kelly to have introduced from the European Parliament and the EPP side the priorities for the revision. I think we need to be pragmatic. The objectives are commonly shared: decarbonisation and energy security. Decarbonisation was, of course, the main objective of the European Green or of the Fit for 55 package you just mentioned, James. We came out with a proposal before the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Shortly after that, this unthinkable tragedy unfolded and led to indeed the Commission's emergency reactions in many ways on gas, electricity, on the overall challenges for energy security through REPowerEU and various emergency measures being taken and agreed also with the member states and agreed also and consulted with the European Parliament in many ways. And that will continue. As you know, there will be a market design proposal also coming out in mid-March. This includes industry, very much related to the efforts under the European Green Deal, and REPowerEU, the Green Deal Industrial Plan, and the Net Zero Industry Act, which will come out in mid-March. So we need to see the challenges from various angles and have flexibility guaranteed for member states. The specific conditions and circumstances are indeed different across the Union. There are different starting points. There are different strengths and weaknesses, and simply different challenges in many ways, different cultures, different ways of doing things. So we have to allow for that, and that is actually also what we think will be possible through the reinforced national building renovation plans, which build on the long-term renovation strategies in being more operational, in creating a commonly agreed and consulted reference framework. Create a common understanding amongst all stakeholders inside a member state, but also with the neighboring member states and stakeholders across the borders. What actually are the challenges? What needs to be addressed? How do we address those? What money is available? How do we build up skills, increase the number of workers? What are the projections to have reliable information and common understanding on this? So this is absolutely crucial. Of course, the EPBD tries to make sure that there's a kind of, I would say, minimum framework in terms of ensuring quality of information, comparability and transparency of information, inclusiveness, and setting also the key priorities, which are decarbonisation and definitely also energy security by emphasizing the need to save energy. So that benefits definitely energy security at the same time as it does decarbonisation and the affordability of energy for citizens and companies. So the more you can, in a reasonable manner, save, the better it is. So of course, the question is always up to what limit? What are the respective costs for investments and savings projected into the future? But this is a crucial consideration. Of course, the overall decarbonisation objectives. From that point of view, we are indeed technology neutral. So there are certainly some mega trends which are happening, which is a move towards electrification to a large degree in transport, but also buildings. But this is by no means 100% solution. So there needs to be diversification also for the sake of energy security. There are a number of gaseous solutions and other renewable energies which will have to play a role and which will play a very useful role and very important role also in the future. How exactly to roll that out and where to use which form of energy and source of energy in which way will be for the member states to work out, often at the local and regional level, through heating and cooling planning, municipal development, broader reflections on which buildings to tackle. The message from the EPBD, but also from the renovation wave, is don't forget the worst performing buildings, so even prioritize and focus on them. But this will not be the whole story, of course, but the worst performing buildings should not be left out. They should be part of that. There's therefore the accelerator through the form of minimum energy performance standards at European level, for the very worst performing buildings to move up as quickly as possible up to a certain level for multiple benefits which this can generate, better life quality, better health, better security and safety for people inside, but of course also saving energy, reducing economic burden on people on a recurrent basis, and making sure investments can take place, because we see the improvements into buildings very much like Mr. Kelly said, an investment in preserving value, in preserving quality, because if the investments did not take place, economic value would simply degrade over time, and at the same time we would clearly stay under optimal levels for societal inclusiveness of vulnerable people. No one should be left behind. I think it's very much then linked also to social policy and public health policy in many ways, and therefore the renovation wave, but also the EPBD called for an integrated thinking and analysis of related policy objectives, which would be addressed also by a deep renovation, be it indoor air quality, be it prevention and removing hazardous materials, being clear about which materials are where, making sure that safety and security are ensured, fire safety, but also seismic safety. And that is something which should be reflected fully when doing a renovation. Mr. Kelly mentioned, of course, very important enabling measures. This is the financial support. Some financial support in many ways from public sources, EU level, but also national level, and from private sources through innovative financial instruments, through cooperation between the public sector and the private sector to de-risk, to guarantee, to make sure that the liquidity challenge for the initial investment can be overcome, and that the payback for citizens and society more broadly can materialize. So it's an investment challenge. It's a reasonable investment in most cases, even if you just look at the money side. But of course, many people will be overwhelmed right from the start in getting over the threshold, over the hurdle of providing the liquidity, the initial investment amounts which are needed. And that is basically, I would say, the task for the EU, but also in particular for the member states and the financial industry, to design meaningful and usable, accessible financial instruments. And then for one-stop shops, ideally, to bring together that information to the benefit of citizens, to make information widely accessible, but also tailor-made, that you can go to a certain place and you get advice on how you can finance, what do you need to do, what are the main challenges, how do you address them, how do you find out about the weaknesses of your own building, and what actually needs to be done to overcome that, whom to address. And I think this is absolutely crucial to overcome the hesitations or simply the information barrier for people who are usually not experts in tackling, and then also being able to launch this kind of complex experience as a renovation is for everyone. And I think that is crucial to bring that together. Mr. Kelly also mentioned the skills, of course, the number of people needed. This will be largely for the member states to establish projections of future developments, attract young people, provide training facilities, put on track basically the education and professional training machinery, which simply takes several years to materialize. And of course, the EU can contribute and will contribute through EU level action like the Pact for Skills, for instance, and partnerships with industry and unions to make sure that good practices can be shared. So this is absolutely crucial. And of course, from the EPBD, you are aware there are several concepts which are important, the zero emission buildings, then the different financing measures which were mentioned in Article 15, for instance, and then the transport link, sustainable mobility, link to electrification, recharging infrastructure, and a number of other important elements, which of course are now under discussion between the different institutions. So we hope that the European Parliament will vote in favor in the plenary, so that there will be then the launch of trilogues possible under the Swedish presidency still and hopefully an agreement can be found until the end of June. So thanks a lot for your kind attention.
No, thanks to you, Stefan, and thanks again also probably even more comprehensive overview than from Mr. Kelly, but we might expect that as one of the main architects of the legislation we have on the table, Stefan. I think we found some very interesting similarities in points that you raised with Seán, with MEP Kelly, I should say. And in principle, one of the things that I have noticed that is indeed we are talking very much about that need for technology neutrality, that need for different types of fuels and technologies to deliver. But one of the first questions we've had is saying, and actually I'd be very interested in your point of view on this, because I think you may know better than I do actually the answer to this, that we have stressed technology neutrality, but the GDIP, which is I believe is the Green Deal Industrial Plan, and European initiatives disregard or exclude some technologies such as direct renewable heat. How do you ensure a level playing field among technologies? So obviously, I'm sorry, this is an anonymous attendee. Please, if you are raising questions, do try to remember to add your name, so I can't tell you that's on behalf of Stefan. But do you see it the same way as the question here? Are some of those initiatives excluding specific technologies?
I think that is not the intention to exclude any technology which makes an important contribution. I think the Green Deal Industrial Plan and the upcoming Net Zero Industry Act, of course, need some focus. So where particular shortcomings are identified in relation to the need for EU industry to be particularly strengthened. So it's more about the industrial capacity, delivery, and production inside the EU to make sure that there will be reliance also on EU production. And it's not really about deployment so much. That is energy policy. So it's basically the production side, basically the manufacturing side, which is covered by the industrial plan. Whereas energy policy is primarily interested, of course, in deployment. And there we need to have an open approach. And the question is always, of course, how can we and how should we as EU, but also as member states, promote through specific programs, including subsidies, industrial activities in Europe? When is it justified and where is it justified? Of course, we have stated law, but that is also the underlying logic of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. To identify particular areas where further support may be needed and special rules may have to be applied. I think that is always a very difficult balance to find because we can't promote everything at the same time in terms of particular support, but only where there's a specific need identified. But from the energy policy side, we need to have an open approach. All solutions which can contribute, including on on heat, so not to have basically just electricity and that's it, but look at the various forms and sources of heat which could be usable, thermal, solar, geothermal, biogas, of course, and biomass, under the conditions of guaranteeing sustainability, of course. So that is, I think, very important for member states and industry and the stakeholders to find the right balance here, and that is actually the idea of the national plans, to have a pragmatic but also evidence-based approach to that. The building renovation plans are, of course, part of the overall, I would say, planning national energy and climate plans. They are a more specific component of that, so they have to be integrated to see basically in a very rational manner what is best for the country. Where do we maximize the benefits while minimizing the costs for society? Yeah? So that is the objective, and there we have to have a completely open approach.
No, indeed, I'm glad you used that balancing word. I think that is important. We need to have that sort of balanced approach. This isn't going to surprise you, but the other two questions that have come in for you are also relating to, in a way, a kind of perceived imbalance, if you will. Catherine Hannon has written and said, in the context of eco-labeling and design, how does the European Commission plan to support multi-technology approach, including, for her, the decarbonisation of on-grid and off-grid gas? Do you have any specific mechanisms you have in mind through the eco-labeling and design initiatives, Stefan?
Well, in terms of products policy, so eco-design and energy labeling, we try to identify the best solutions for a certain service. So that is basically the idea. And the policy objective is decarbonization. So the question is, how do we achieve decarbonization? What are the best solutions to realize that policy objective? And as I said before, there is definitely a role for gas, therefore a role for grid and off-grid gas. The precondition is that it should be decarbonized. I think that is an aspect which is important for our climate objectives, but of course also for energy security. So that is, and the question is then how exactly to do that. But clearly there is a role for gaseous solutions. The question is how much of what, where exactly, and that I think would depend on the analysis by member states within the context, of course, of the broader objectives which have been identified.
Thanks for that. Sorry, just scribbling out a couple of the notes at the end of that. But yes, I see your point that it's kind of it depends on the regional differences that you might experience. Some places maybe are in a better position to utilize different types of technologies given their natural features. I think the further and last question is from Henry Kading is indeed again a bit more a question. In fact, I think it's more about district heating and large-scale geothermal in a way, but saying, is there really a true level playing field for all renewables? There's a sort of focused on certain levels. I mean, we see obviously they mentioned solar. We know there's a solar strategy, getting buildings ready for solar and this sort of thing, which you are working on. And it says that, you know, and heat pumps, of course, it says that, sorry, and individual end consumer heat pumps. But overlooking other things like district heating or large-scale geothermal, do you think that's a fair criticism or not?
I think district heating is a very important part of the solution in a large number of member states or in various member states. Again, here the challenge is how to decarbonize district heating. How do we achieve that? How do we make it more efficient? And for the residual energy, how do we decarbonize? What solutions are there? And these solutions need to be assessed. Yeah? There can be, of course, electricity-based solutions, large-scale heat pumps, or gaseous solutions, geothermal. Very important where it exists, it should be used, or thermal solar. So not just electricity, it can a lot of storage potential is in thermal technologies, be it geothermal or solar thermal, and the potential should be fully assessed and used. So we are what of course happens sometimes in policy papers, but also in political and stakeholder discussions, that there are certain fashionable subjects, if I may call it like that, and they may get a certain over attention for a certain time, but I think this is usually rebalanced after a while. We see, of course, trends. Yeah? Certainly we see the mega trend towards electrification in many ways, but it does not mean that electrification will be 100% solution, by far not, neither on heating and cooling nor on transport. Yeah? So, and that is simply what we have to recognize, and we have to see what is the best solution and how much would it eventually then add up to in each sector, for which segment, in which country, and that requires this kind of in-depth assessment and also national specific assessment.
Thank you for that, Stefan. Other questions coming in, but I'm conscious of time as well, and it's already 12:30, a little bit after 2:30. And I would like to bring our other panelists in. Stefan, I hope you can stay with us, and if you can't, of course, we also fully understand. And if you need to drop off, please feel free to do so. And I will say thank you very much for the time that you've given us so far. But I'd like to bring in Hélène Sibileau from, as I said, the European Performance Buildings Institute, the Building Performance Institute of Europe, to give it its correct title, BPIE. Senior Policy Advisor. Hélène, you've heard quite a lot of views today from Seán and also from Stefan, some very comprehensive discussions. How are you and BPIE seeing the way the debate is going? Are you happy with the way the debate is going, or do you feel that we are somehow not quite getting to where we ought to be?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation. Maybe for those who might not know us so well, BPIE is Europe's leading independent think tank working on energy performance of buildings. And in terms of activities, we provide research, analysis, but also policy advice on EU level legislation, including the EPPD. So in terms of being happy or not happy, we would say that In a nutshell, we've seen a lot of progress, and I think the EPPD revision that we have on the table now is very wide, encompassing, looking at bringing new provisions on the table and revising, modifying a lot others. So that's really great, because the challenge is huge. But then looking at how the different negotiations go in both the Council and the Parliament, we have some worries, but then I can say more in details in my few points. In your questions today, we are talking a lot about which technologies we would need to decarbonize buildings. And actually, I want to bring the perspective here of taking a step back and before looking at technologies, asking the question, what is the right approach to endorse? And for us, we would look at 4 pillars that need to be brought in at the same time. So the first one is adopting the right objectives. Second, implementing the right policy measures. And then third and fourth, optimal financial support and ensuring access to advisory services for building renovation. And then only you can talk about technologies. So first, regarding the objectives, we have to recall, of course, by 2050, the objectives of climate neutrality and the zero emission building stock. And for us at BPIE, that means first you need to drastically reduce the energy demand and achieve buildings with very high energy performance. Then you need to undergo a full decarbonization at the operational phase. And by that, we mean energy supplied by renewables only. And the third pillar is ensuring a low embodied carbon emission in buildings. That's also important. That's for 2050, but we also have to look at actually what is closer to us in 2030. According to our own calculations, to be in line with the overall 2030 climate target for the building sector, we need to have a 60% reduction of GHG emissions by 2030. And we also need to increase the annual deep energy renovation rate from the current 0.2% to 3% per year. So actually knowing all these objectives and the vision where we need to go in 2030 and 50, what does it mean for the policy measures, the financial support, the advisory services? Well, for us, it means policies on building renovation and decarbonization need to be, and this applies to the EPPD, need to be game changers. We need to foster deep renovation, especially for worst performing buildings, as Stefan Moser was saying. We are in a situation right now, I think, where we cannot afford incremental, small, slow, progressive changes anymore. We had the EPPD for 20 years. I think now is really the opportunity to move really a step ahead and do that more strongly and quicker. This has implications for a lot of provisions which were mentioned, so I won't delve into the details, the standards for new buildings, the minimum energy performance standards, how you set up financial support to actually foster and prioritize projects on deep renovation, renovation passports, etc. Another implication when we look at the decarbonization of the supply part for us means that we cannot rely on fossil fuel boilers anymore. And that is applying for buildings all across segments. So in new buildings, in existing buildings that are being renovated, where you're replacing your heating system, where basically all existing buildings as such. This is for the policy framework and how we envisage how to look at the sector to achieve our objectives. And I still want to now come to the questions of the technologies and mention 2 BPIE studies, which I think might be interesting for this debate today. One is a recent one, and one is actually to be published next month. The recent one that we published earlier this year, we looked at energy savings potential in the residential sector, thanks to insulation, and a few numbers and findings. We found actually that if all existing residential buildings were renovated to achieve target U values, so looking at the performance of the building envelope, we would have savings for space heating that are equivalent to 777 terawatt hour. It's a massive savings potential. That means actually 44% reduction by 2050. And the good thing is also, we were mentioning these local and national flexibility. Actually, the good thing in our study is that we not only have the EU potential, but the member states potential. And we found that actually it would be beneficial across all the EU for all member states. We have 7 countries which could save at least 50% of their final energy consumption. And additionally to that, we have 16 countries which can achieve more than 40%. So the potential is actually everywhere. Also worth recalling maybe here is the fact that to achieve this massive reduction in energy demand, actually most technologies and products already exist on the market today. I would say actually the building sector is not a hard to abate sector. It's actually rather a sector where we should invest because it has this big energy savings potential. As I said, we have the solutions, the technologies, the products today on the market that can deliver the savings. And what we need to do is to roll them out. So I think that it's an important point as well when we look at the interactions between technologies, policies, and the objectives that we have. And finally, the analysis that I was mentioning that is coming up next month, we were looking there into the heat pump readiness of buildings, also based on the envelope performance. It's, yes, indeed a highly trending topic. What we looked into was to model for 30 target buildings, how much they're actually heat pump ready. We found that for 2/3 of them, they would need to go more than a shallow renovation to be made heat pump ready, which means on the other side that you have 1/3 of the buildings today in this study that are actually heat pump ready. And what is interesting is the deeper you go in the renovation, the more you maximize the heat pump readiness. And also, if you go really to a full deep renovation for many buildings in the study, you eliminate the need for any fossil fuel backup system. And this is interesting that we found that in many segments, so single family homes, multifamily homes, and also in colder climates, where the heat pump could actually completely cover the heating load throughout the full season. So that was really interesting, and I hope that you will stay tuned for the publication, which is scheduled in the second half of April. So yeah, I just wanted to maybe recall the fact that we need to look at different goals, different time horizon. We need to make sure that everything is coherent from short, mid to long term. But yeah, my main message actually would be that deep renovation of buildings, including a switch to clean renewable sources, actually answering all those objectives with all those timelines in mind. And yeah, I hope that we can have also an interesting discussion, because I would assume that we won't have the same opinions on some of the points.
That's really great, Hélène, and thanks for that a good overview. And I am very, very pleased you've brought up the studies. I think everybody will be very happy and keen to look at the recently one, which is looking at the energy savings potential. That's of course very important. And then the second one that you have on heat pump readiness, again, very important contributions to this debate. I suppose that you also picked that you say in a way that it's not hard to abate because the technologies are there, except you also picked up on the point, which I also noted from Seán Kelly, MEP, and also from Stefan, which is the financing element. It's about getting finance. So I was pleased that you also picked that point up, because I think often people do talk about buildings hard to abate because of the finance that is needed and making sure that it's accessible to the individuals that will do the work. There are questions coming through, but I'm going to just actually go to Federica, because I want to make sure that Federica has a chance to also have her 6-7 minutes, because that'll already take us up to 10-2 to put forward her points of view. And I hope we'll get 5 or 10 minutes at the end just to answer a couple of the questions that are coming through. And maybe everybody will go till 3:05. So please, if that's okay for everyone, we'll work on that basis. Federica, over to you. Federica Sabbati, Secretary General of the European Heating Industry Association. Great to have you with us today. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, James. Interesting discussion, of course. Perhaps what I'll focus on is a little bit our take on the latest report, the contribution that the European Parliament or the ITRE committee has now given to the text of the Commission. The first thing that is important for us, and I think for all to remember, is that indeed the EPBD has been around for some time, but so far it had not really focused on the most challenging part of the building sector. So EPBD was very effective in setting standards, minimum standards for the new build, minimum efficiency standards for new build. But the big challenge, we've always said, and if you look around in any of the European capitals, you'll see is the renovation, what we would call the renovation market. So the important contribution that EPBD is doing right now is really to look and try to tackle this renovation market. In general, I would disagree quite strongly with what Hélène said. We think that for these specific reasons that I'm going to mention, the building sector is a hard to abate sector. It's not a hard to, so it's a hard to abate sector because buildings are, as Seán Kelly was saying, very diverse. They lie in very different climate zones. They have they lie on different energy infrastructure. The people that live in them have different financial capabilities. They are, you know, on grid, off grid, and they were built largely before the 1960s. If you look in Europe, where there were no building codes. These to these differences, there is, you know, to overcome this difference and find one decarbonization strategy for all of them, you will need to consider some of the things that were mentioned today. So certainly the high investment required to refurbish them, both in terms of insulation, but also in terms of replacement of the heating systems. Consumers will need to invest in that, but also as society, we will need to invest in supporting these mega trends that are actually not mega trends happening for nothing. They are led very much by policy at the moment, and I'm talking about particularly electrification. So in order to support that, we will need to strengthen an electricity grid, which is not made yet for that increase of electrification of transport and of buildings. We'll need, therefore, to make buildings more heat pump ready than they are today. And therefore, we will need both public and private funding or financing for that. That's a fact, is just an element of a barrier that we need to overcome. And I would add to the fact that there is also limited time for that, because we have a target of 2050. And here in this sector, things move relatively slowly. Just think how many times in your life you have changed your heating system, not to talk about, you know, renovated the roof of or re-insulated the roof of your building. It shows that it is a market that moves quite slowly. So the investments are needed to speed up. So we need to accelerate this move from, you know, fossil fuels used in heating to renewable energy used in buildings and increased energy efficiency. And obviously, the war that Russia is carrying out now in Ukraine adds more pressure, adds also an opportunity for us to move in that direction. And, you know, as the members of the European heating industry are producing both heat pumps and all other technologies, including solar, including boilers, including, you know, renewable ready technologies. So in that sense, we can also be optimistic because we know that the technologies are there. So it's in a way, it's a question of deployment. Still, that deployment is difficult to do. So I think that buildings are a hard to abate sector for different reasons than you know, heavy industry or so on. But it still is not easy to do. We just need to take it as a fact, because if we do that, then we know also what are the problems that we need to tackle. Which brings me to the second point of the report of ITRE. From our point of view, the Parliament has added that element of, you know, let's look at actually what is inside the buildings. Let's accelerate the replacement of those heating systems that are now old and inefficient. You know, in Europe, there's 105 million space heaters or heating systems installed in our houses, and 60% of them are inefficient, old and inefficient, and they're based on fossil fuels. And these are replaced at 4% rate, an annual rate a year. So it's an issue that we need to solve. We need to accelerate that replacement so that we can phase in renewable energies and phase out fossil fuels for heating. And the ITRE report mentions that and gives some, pushes a little bit member states to look at that, because like Mr. Kelly was saying, heating is also very local, yeah, because of the differences that I mentioned. So every member state will need to look at what is their local conditions and what is the best way of doing it, of moving towards more efficient and renewable-based systems. This also brings me to the other, I think, good point that Mr. Kelly mentioned, and that is that, we actually don't really have the luxury of excluding options for decarbonizing, for the fact that the buildings are so different, for the fact that we have limited time, and for the fact that there are actually assets, i.e. all the technologies that can work with renewable energy. So we cannot discard them, and this is why we think that it's good that the report that has been voted now brings that element of openness. Any renewable energy source that can contribute to decarbonized buildings has a role to play and should play that role. And leaving the door open to that is only in line, it is only in coherence with the view that has been stated both by Stefan and by Seán, that actually by 2050 we are not going to have a scenario of net zero full electrification. You will have more than just electricity, and hopefully more than just electricity means also renewable electricity everywhere. So if you have that vision for the long term, you need to also have that open technology, which means just make sure that everywhere you can use a renewable energy, you use it. And everywhere where you can save energy, first of all, you do that. So that's very important. Just to mention, because studies were mentioned, I think I want to mention a study that Guidehouse made recently, where they analyzed two scenarios, two pathways for the decarbonization of buildings in 2050, looking at taking into consideration the Repower EU targets. So sort of, if you want, midterm between now and 2050, and the two scenarios are both much higher in electrification, which we think is necessary. We need to roll up many more heat pumps and hybrid heat pumps that we have today. So it takes into consideration that high level of electrification, but one of the two scenarios has only that element, and the other scenario has an open portfolio, if you want, an open energy approach, open energy meaning renewable energy. Yeah, and that scenario shows that you can reach, or Europe will reach, the 2050 targets with the Repower EU targets, intermediate, in a cheaper, more socially acceptable way than the electrification only scenario. All of this is quite coherent with the long-term strategy of the European Commission. So I think the numbers also support that. The Guidehouse study talks about over 520 billion euro in comparison to a full electric scenario that you will be saving with a multi-technology one. And the last thing, I mean,
as well, can we just quickly get towards the end of the point, because it's 14:52 and there are some questions coming in. So just if you want to finalize, that would be great.
My final point was just mentioned also by Stefan. The last important point is ITRE recognizes also the needs for skills for the transition. This is an important part of the puzzle, because for our technologies, but this is in general for the construction, you don't go to the supermarket and buy them. You need an installer, you need a technician that comes, looks at the building, sees what is best for your building, and then installs it. If these installers that use, they install the new technologies in our buildings are not skilled to do that, or they are just not enough, then we have a problem. So I think this is an important piece of the puzzle that will be a responsibility of member states, but we should not forget it.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Federica. It's certainly in the notes that I've made today. I can assure you an availability of installers and indeed the training and skills that will be needed, which I also see as a potential bottleneck that will need to have which have to be properly addressed. Thank you, Federica. Thank you indeed for that very, very comprehensive again, but some good focus on talking on, the need, not to exclude options at this stage. And I think that is important in terms of the pragmatism that we've heard through all of the speakers. The questions that are coming in are interesting in the sense that I see questions are being sort of targeted to individuals, but I would actually like to ask you all for your views. One of them from Philippe Garec or Garec Philippe is asking about basically how we could use hybrid heating equipment, such as hybrid heat pumps or cogeneration, to help to reduce the peak demand, which is one of the main problems for the building sector, by basically, coupling gas and electricity. How do you all see hybrid solutions, not just necessarily heat pumps? You also mentioned cogeneration. There could be other technologies there as well. Maybe Stefan, maybe we start with you, and then we go to Hélène and Federica, and then try to be brief so we've got a chance to get through 2 or 3 of the questions. That would be ideal. Thanks, Stefan. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, James. I think flexibility is the key word. What can create flexibility should be used because we know today that we don't know exactly what will happen in the future. So that I think is a key lesson from life in general, but also from the last few years in energy. And therefore hybrid systems will play a role. Of course, it will require some kind of thorough system optimization across the board, where the different options are being fully assessed, and see also how we maintain on the one hand the decarbonization progress, and on the other hand energy security, flexibility, being able to use different forms of and sources of energy.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks also for brevity. Hélène?
Yes, maybe a slightly different response from my side. I would say I think I definitely see a role for a heat pump indeed to provide this flexibility, which is, I think, very important for consumers, because if you can access to flexibility, you can access affordability, you can respond to prices. Also, not to forget that if we do deep renovation and as a first step, we reduce the energy demand, not only at peak loads, but more overall, you also ensure that flexibility for the entire energy system. Also in this upcoming study that I was mentioning, we looked as well as the temperature drop in buildings, depending on also the performance of their building envelope. And we found indeed that there is a big difference to the deeper renovation you've done, helps the building actually to lose temperature, to not lose so much temperature, and not so fast after the heating, for example, is switched off or reduced. So that is an important point as well, to provide flexibility to the system. As it comes to hybrid systems, I think at BPIE we would not favor those types of system. I think we would, for different reasons, prefer to have, just heat pumps or other types of full renewable technologies for different reasons. One, and I cannot enter now into the details of the reasoning, but if we mention hybrid heat pumps opening up to hydrogen, if that's the case, then I think it opens up, health and safety issues for us. The question of whether the hydrogen is fully green, when it can be green, fully renewables, the feasibility issues of changing all the pipes and the boilers, the economic issue for the cost of the consumers. I think we would see it rather with doubts, the potential of rolling out hybrid heat pumps, and as well the fact that you have other things that are already existing that can provide that flexibility and affordability to consumers.
Thank you, Hélène. And then Federica, I will come to you. Just add the little question at the end that's coming in from Eva Hennig, who is asking also, alongside the hybrid question that I've asked, how do you see, and asking you because of your EHI hat, how do you see the deployment of thermally driven gas and future hydrogen heat pumps? So first ask the question that Stefan and Hélène have done, and then maybe if you could just give a short brief point on how you see the deployment of thermally driven gas and hydrogen heat pumps.
Sorry, it's me or Stefan?
You, Federica. Yeah, just to answer the question about hybrid heat pumps that everyone else has had a go. But there's this extra one. I'll only ask you about your view on what will happen to hydrogen heat pumps and thermally driven ones. Whether they will.
So for me,
yes, that's for you.
Okay, so for me on hybrid heat pumps, I think it's a no-brainer. It's such it's easier way to let heat pumps be introduced, if you want, into the building stock, that it's really, it makes sense for the issue of flexibility of the system, so for the energy system, so that there is no, there is a solution for the peak load that only heating has, when it's cold, it's evening, no sun, no wind. So that from an energy system makes total sense. From the consumer side, it also makes a lot of sense because it allows immediate cut on energy bills and on let's say on CO2 emissions from the building, while not having to undergo immediately all the deep renovation that you would need just for a normal heat pump. So it allows that stage renovation. So also on the point of view of economics is quite interesting, and it allows them also to keep maintaining, and that we see really in several markets to that familiarity of the heating system. That is an element that we see in the field, in the market. They know, consumers know somehow the system, and they can add a new piece, and then they start to be confident with the second system, which is the hybrid, which is the heat pump. Just one word on the Italian market, which is now the most dynamic market for hybrid heat pumps. Hybrids are 40% in last year, 40%, almost 50% of the sales of heat pumps in Italy. So it's really a booming market. We see that also happening in the Netherlands. So we think it has really potential.
Thanks for that. And no specific comments really on hydrogen heat pumps or thermally driven ones?
I mean, thermally driven heat pumps is, there are many different types of heat pumps. There's electric heat pumps, hybrid heat pumps, and thermally driven heat pumps. They all serve different type of building. Yeah, we don't have, all buildings are different. So we're trying to find solution for everything. So thermally driven heat pumps use gaseous fuels at the most efficiency. So we think it's super interesting, particularly for the renovation market as well. So something that will grow in the market, of course, depends on a number of factors, including also on the incentives, because at the moment all the heat pumps are driven in the markets are driven a lot by policy support, but they have a very interesting future, we think. On the hydrogen, I don't know why we're talking about hybrid with hydrogen only. I think the most what we are seeing at the moment is certainly because the hydrogen market is not yet developed. We're seeing a role for biomethane, particularly as a backup, so as the fuel that backs up the hybrid bullet part of the hybrid. We see that happening in different markets, and it will grow. Hydrogen, we need to develop the market, but that is also has a potential.
Thanks, Federica. And I see, Hélène, you would like to come back in. I'm sure there's some points there you would like to respond to. So I'm going to let you
I would have many points, but I will just maybe focus on actually what just Federica said on the availability and the need to ramp up. I think the concerns as well is if the hybrid heat pump is running with hydrogen, that actually green hydrogen based on renewables is quite scarce, and we're not sure that it makes sense to actually use it in heating where you have other available ready to be rolled out solutions. I mean, for me, it would make more sense. I'm not working in these other sectors, but it would make more sense to use this green hydrogen in other hard to abate sectors like the energy intensive industry, steel, I don't know. The same goes, I think, for biomethane. I'm not sure it can be also ramped up too much and too fast to actually respond to the need of the building decarbonization, which needs to happen now before 2030 and in the early 2030s. I mean, yeah, biomethane has also these other competing questions with agriculture and crops. So I think for the fact that it's quite small in volume, and also the fact that it should be used where it's most useful, meaning other sectors, that's why I found that trying to boost hydrogen and heating for buildings is not the best use of it.
Thanks, Hélène. As I say, I'd like to be fair and like to give everyone a chance to have a comment on each other's points of view, and I think that makes our debate much more enriched. We are, of course, over time already. It's 3 minutes past 3. I would like to ask each of you just to have one final sentence, one final statement. I wonder, Stefan, if you have heard anything here today which makes you feel that maybe there needs to be more, how should we say, balance, technology neutrality, or are you still satisfied that the approach taken by the Commission so far has delivered sufficient technology neutrality?
Thanks a lot, James. I think technology neutrality is important. The EPBD guarantees that, but also our other policy actions. I think what Hélène just said on the relative priorities of how to use which form of energy is the crucial question. What are the relative prices? What is the availability? And indeed, for hydrogen, this seems currently not to be the case, that it would be too precious to be used for heating and cooling in general terms. Yeah, so there may always be exceptions. I think that assessment will have to be made for the entire energy system on the basis of the specific circumstances and conditions in each member state, and broken down to a regional and local level also. Important here is integration, systemic thinking, aggregation at a higher level, neighborhoods and districts, to have systemic responses really, and think across the various policy objectives and also sectors, notably transport and buildings. So that is absolutely crucial, and requires the close cooperation with all the stakeholders and citizens, and is part of the democratic process. Of course, would have to be accompanied also by local politicians really, in order to bring in all the citizens here. That is, from our point of view, absolutely crucial.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Indeed, that is indeed crucial. I'm glad that you mentioned and wrapped up on that point. Hélène, you mentioned in your intervention that we need to have targets of sort of 60% GHG reductions in buildings by 2030, and the renovation rate needs to go from 0.2 to 3%. Do you believe that the policy packages that have been put on the table, EPBD, EED, some of the other things that have been referenced today, BPIE, are we on track to do that? Or do you think we're still a long way short of where we need to be?
I think in terms of where we are, if we are on track or not, I can respond that actually we are not. Amongst the many other studies that BPIE has done over the last month, we have an EU buildings climate tracker that we issued for the first time last year, and that we will do again this year, that looks at where is the building stock in terms of decarbonizing by 2050, and we're not on track, that's for sure. Whether now the EPBD can close this gap actually will also depend on how the negotiations will go. I mean, the text is not finalized. It's at the end, let's say, of a very long policy process, that's true, but the trilogues still need to take place. In any case, the Parliament plenary still needs to vote on the text. So I think there is still room for improvement during this last phase of the negotiations to close the gap. And we also have to think about, yes, the Buildings Directive is the main instrument policy file at EU level for buildings, but there are others that should also contribute to the same objective, the EED, the Renewables Directive, and also that member states, because then of course it needs to be transposed and implemented, should also take their own responsibility and start transposition and implementation as soon as possible, and engage with the local and municipal level as well. So I think it's a collective effort, and EPBD is certainly a main part in that, but it's not the only one. And we'll be working, of course, to help policymakers to improve it and transpose it as best as possible in the next month.
Yeah, and thank you, Hélène. Thanks also for that good view as well, where we are in the legislative process. Of course, and we are taking place just before the plenary vote, which is due in the next week or so. Federica, well, one of the things that's come through a lot is investments, and we were talking about when we talk together, we talk a lot about the new systems. And I'm pretty sure that a hybrid heating system is still more expensive than a boiler today. How are we going to get that money? Do you think we're on track to get that money? Is there going to be enough public money to really drive and underpin this? I mean, if we're going to have the renovation rates and things boosting forward, is there going to be enough money to underpin all of this activity that we need in the next 7 years?
Look, I'm really the wrong person to ask. The crystal ball, is there going to be money? I mean, seriously, I sincerely hope so, because otherwise we're not going anywhere. It's obvious, as I said, that the heat pump rollout at the moment is completely supported by policy instruments and by financial instruments. This is clear, and it's good because we can sell many more of the heat pumps. I think in general, what we need to focus on is tearing down the barriers for heat pumps, as it is now a priority to increase electrification. Yeah, that's the first thing. But we need to think long term. And as we know that electrification is not going to be the only solution, then we need to keep the doors open to other solutions. And we don't know yet how the market for green gases, for example, is going to develop. But we need to be able to use it if there is. And there are some quite clear targets the REPowerEU has put forward, particularly both for biomethane and for hydrogen. I do not buy anymore the story of hydrogen as a champagne when there's also other sectors that are not even able to use it now. We have several projects of hydrogen used in buildings across Europe at local level. Local level should decide what and how to decarbonize. If hydrogen is part of that picture, even for a small part, then they should be able to do that. And I think this is, going back to, we don't have the luxury of closing ourselves to any options at the moment. I think this is, for me, a really important piece of the puzzle that should work with EPBD and eco-design and any other policies that has a long-term effect on buildings.
Thank you very much, Federica. And I think that's a good point to wrap up on. Indeed, from a Eurogas point of view, we would probably share that point that we believe that all options that are going to contribute to a renewable and decarbonised building sector in 2030 and 2050 should still be on the table today and should still be considered on their merits and their values over the coming period. We have overrun by 10 minutes. It's been one of my worst sharing performances yet in this series. I apologise to you all for that, but thank you also for those of you who stayed with us. Thanks very much to Stefan. Thank you to Federica, and thank you for Hélène coming in. We, of course, have heard very different points of view today. We embrace that and we like that. We like to have a good discussion. And so I hope that you've all enjoyed that, and as much as I have. And I must also thank the team and Kathleen also for helping out specifically with Seán Kelly's video today. Thanks very much to the Eurogas team for organising this. And then finally, of course, thanks to you, the participants, for coming. The questions that we can answer that have not been answered during the course of this debate will be answered on LinkedIn in a post coming in the next week or so. Buildings are a hugely important part of our everyday life. Of course, we live and work in buildings. We travel to and from buildings. They are a major source of carbon emissions at the moment. And we are all united in one thing, and I'm pretty sure that I can say that on behalf of all the people also watching this. We're all convinced we have to do more to reduce the GHG emissions from buildings. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you at our next Let's Meet in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, James.
Thank you.
Hélène, Federica, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.